How does Vienna, Austria tie into mid-century modern architecture here in Hawaii? Well, this is David Buck with Harcourt's Island Real Estate, and today we're going to do a deep dive into mid-century modern architecture here in Hawaii. And this all stemmed with this incredible event I had the opportunity to attend this past week that was hosted by the Liljestrand Foundation. I've been following them on Instagram for quite a while, and this event popped up. And it's a two-day event. It is hosted not just by the Liljestrand Foundation, who I highly recommend following on Instagram. They have a lot of really cool architectural features they post there, as well as just the beautiful features of the Liljestrand house itself that was designed by Vladimir Ossipoff. So this event was a two-day event that was this past Friday and Saturday, and it was not just hosted by the foundation, but DOCOMOMO Hawaii, as well as the Honolulu Museum of Art, and also the Kaimana Beach Hotel, which was generous enough to put up all the speakers and guests at the hotel there at the beach at Diamond Head. So first off, the first night was hosted at the Doris Duke Theater at the Honolulu Museum. And there I had the opportunity to see a documentary that was done on Rudolph Schindler. And going into this, I honestly had no idea who Rudolph Schindler was. But this is the documentary hosted by Meryl Streep, and I had the opportunity to watch the trailer online, and it is online. I'm going to post a link in here. And this is a documentary film that they've been touring not just all across the country, but across the globe. So I just happened to be here when in town while they were hosting this event. This was a long journey by Valentina Ganeva, who is the filmmaker, and she had a passion about Rudolph Schindler. And once again, I didn't know who he was. My big takeaway from this documentary was this guy was way ahead of his time. I'm going to dive into it a little bit here, but basically, he was born in Vienna, Austria, and he started practicing architecture shortly after the turn of century, 1920s. And he was doing some mid-century stuff, which we all refer to as mid-century, well before the curve. So I don't want to spoil too much because I really want you to see this documentary, but I'm going to give you some of the takeaways. So ended up coming over to the United States, and at one point in time did work for Frank Lloyd Wright. What better architect could you have for a mentor? So she dives into their relationship and working for Mr. Wright, and kind of running his office at one point, and then also talks about the influences that they both had on each other and their relationships. And then also in this documentary is another famous architect by the name of Richard Neutra. And both Neutra as well as Rudolph Schindler did most of their practice in Southern California around Los Angeles. And one of the iconic homes, kind of like the Liljestrand house, has now become the iconic home of Ossipoff here on Oahu. The iconic home for Rudolph Schindler is actually a home he did for himself, and that's the Kings Road home in Los Angeles. So I'm not going to throw too many photos up because, once again, I'm going to recommend you seeing this documentary, but it talks about the experiments and his lifestyle, and experimenting with concrete and plaster and translucent materials, and the homes that were displayed here were out of this world. And like I said, he's way ahead of his time. So oftentimes we think of mid-century architecture being done in the 50s on average, could be earlier, could be later. But this guy passed away in the 50s, and some of the stuff that he pumped out there was well before some of the greats that we know. Even though we've heard of Frank Lloyd Wright, some of the local architects here in Hawaii got some inspiration from him. And if you see this in the backdrop here, what really got me excited about this event was the title of the event was called Space Architects, Schindler, Preis, and Ossipoff, the latter two of which I've heard of. Alfred Preis was also an Austrian architect from Honolulu. Excuse me, he practiced in Honolulu, but he was also from Austria and Vienna, Austria. And there's lots of common ties here. There is a thing that Valentina talked about during the documentary where she got inspiration with coincidences in life. I'm not going to go into that. Once again, you want to see the movie. But there's a lot of coincidences. I competed in Vienna during high school, so it's one of just a handful of cities I've been to in Europe. But back into tying into Vienna, not just do we have Schindler and Preis. One of the speakers on both evenings was a gentleman by the name of Axel Schmitzberger. He was in the documentary, and he also has a passion for architecture, and he did a book which I've since ordered on Alfred Preis. And Alfred Preis, I'd probably say, is one of the two best, mid-century well-known architects here in Hawaii that not many people know much about. Vladimir Ossipoff was incredible, and you could see his works all throughout the islands. I kind of grew up around his architecture. My wife and I kind of started falling in love with mid-century modern architecture. Gosh, about 18 years ago, I wrote my first blog article in 2008 on active rain. It's still up there if you want to go and look for it. But I was inspired by Sakamoto's display at what was then the Honolulu Art Academy, now Honolulu Museum of Art. And that was done on the 100-year birthday of Vladimir Ossipoff, which was in 2008. And ever since then, I've been blogging about mid-century modern architecture here in Hawaii, and you'll see a common theme. A lot of the homes are going to be Ossipoff as well as Alfred Preis. Now, as far as Ossipoff goes, I grew up around his architecture. I talked about that in my original article. Both of my grandmas lived in Ossipoff properties. I went to Puno. He did the chapel there. I went to, member of the Alfred Canoe Club. At one point in time, I was a member of Pacific Club. All of these incredible, iconic facilities that he designed. Now, Alfred Preis, at the time, I didn't know much about. This photo here is an Alfred Preis home that we remodeled, and we just listed on the market. I'll post a link to that as well. But yeah, Alfred Preis, you don't see much of his architecture around because he didn't have as big a firm. And with Alfred Preis, he's famous iconically for the Arizona Memorial, the Honolulu Zoo, and several other commercial properties around town. But once again, original roots in Vienna, Austria. This is going to be mostly about Vienna and Honolulu, but there are also some ties to Asia. You'll notice with a lot of the mid-century architects here. Vladimir Ossipoff grew up in Japan, born Russian, grew up in Japan. And also you'll see in the documentary that Schindler did a hotel in Tokyo. Won't talk too much about that, but there's definitely ties to Asia as well as Honolulu. Now, after that first night at the Honolulu Museum, as it wrapped up, they did a Q&A with Valentina and Axel on stage, and there were a lot of great questions asked by the audience. And as things wrapped up, I bumped into a couple of realtor friends on my way out, and yeah, I'm not alone in having a passion for mid-century architecture. And one of my friends, we're texting the next day on something else. Her name's Margaret Murchie. We used to work together back in the day at Coldwell Banker, and we actually decided to ride together for the second evening because I was going to be at the Liljestrand house, and parking was a little bit tight, but they had valet parking, and it was an incredibly well-hosted event. It had Austrian wines and Austrian beer and some really good charcuterie. And yeah, the backdrop just couldn't be any better. For those of you that haven't seen the Liljestrand house up on Tantalus, I do highly recommend it. Christy with the foundation as well of Trudy. They put on a world-class act, and it's one of the coolest properties, I think, on this island, and definitely a bucket list if you haven't been there. So the second night kind of had a panel with Axel again and Valentina, and then Graham Hart, who's a local architect. Now, a little bit about Graham. I didn't know much about him, but this guy, he really gives back to the community. He's not just involved with DOCOMOMO Hawaii, but he's also heavily involved with Palehua, which is a house that was Vladimir Ossipoff's personal retreat. And Palehua, for those of you that don't know, is basically in Makakilo on the west side of the island. It's a very simple cottage, and it's actually a nonprofit. You can book a reservation to go there. So, two bucket list things I'm adding to the Liljestrand House and Palehua, if you go to palehua.org. And then I've got a bucket list for myself because I do want to see the King's Road house that Schindler did if or when I go back to Los Angeles. So with that said, we had a panel of, once again, Graham, Axel, and Valentina. And then they talked about influences of architecture here in Hawaii. There were some coincidences or patterns again with several Hawaii architects that did go to UC Berkeley to study architecture, and that was Vladimir Ossipoff, as well as Alan Johnson, Tommy Perkins, and Philip Fisk. So not just those handful of architects, but Alfred Preis included. They often collaborated together on projects and they highly respected each other. Prior to going to this event, a good buddy of mine, Wade, that's got an architecture background, he shared with me a PBS documentary that was done in 1988 on Vladimir Ossipoff. It was called The Architect's Architect. I'll post a link to that here as well. And in that documentary, Alfred Preis was actually quoted a lot about Vladimir Ossipoff, and they had an interview with Vladimir Ossipoff. And as I walked in this meet and greet, one of the people that was interviewed in this documentary as well was Miss Goodsill. And as I walked in, I saw someone with a name tag that said Jane Goodsill. And lo and behold, she was the daughter of Mrs. Goodsill that was in the PBS documentary from 1988. She grew up in a Vladimir Ossipoff home in Puupunini, and she was a real treat and pleasure to talk with. She's an author here locally. She's wrote several books, the first of which is Voices of Hawaii. And yeah, she's an incredible person to talk to, lots of history that she shared about Vladimir Ossipoff. And one theme that he had was he was really good to his clients and he became friends with a lot of his clients. And she had some footage or pictures of him coming over to dinners at their house. And for those of you that don't know, she's going to continue some research and compounding on this, but Puupunini, the neighborhood, is one clusters where Vladimir Ossipoff did a lot of homes here in Honolulu. Another area that you'll see over time, and I've seen over time in selling real estate here, is Wailanui Ridge, directly up the hill here. And Alfred Preis actually had another little pocket of homes that he did, which is off Mele Mele in Manoa. So in addition to Jane Goodsill. There were other owners there that night that did own Ossipoff as well as Alfred Preis homes. And actual Smitsberger, not just did he write the book, during COVID, he got heavily involved and helped restore some of these homes, one of which was on Wilhelmina Rise. I did a little video about that a while back. I met that owner. She couldn't have been sweeter. And yeah, so he's also friends with friends of ours that two brothers that own a couple Alfred Preis homes in Manoa. So it's a tight-knit community of peers that those that have passion for mid-century modern architecture here on Oahu. And it's fun to always learn something new. One of the talks or topics they talked about that night was the butterfly roof that came out by, I believe it was Frank Lloyd Wright, and how Schindler adopted it. Because we revisited some of the topics from the previous night with Rudolph Schindler. Once again, very fascinating story, very fascinating guy. And the tie to Vienna, once again, is going to be Rudolph Schindler, as well as Alfred Preis and Axel Schmitzberger, who's a accomplished architect as well as a professor at, I believe it's Cal Poly Pomona. But yeah, between the three of them, Vienna ties, I've been to Vienna. There are a lot of coincidences here in this lifetime, and I'm just, happy to partake in the event. And if any of you have questions about mid-century modern architecture or are looking to buy or sell a mid-century modern home, that's what I do for a living. I help people buy and sell properties here on Oahu. My name is David Buck once again, and I can be reached at 808-371-3509. Oh, and like I said, our Alfred Preis home we just put on the market recently. If you have questions about that, I'll post a link in here as well. And hope you have a great day. Aloha.